Darren didn't believe in hauntings anymore, but the keys felt cursed the moment they hit his palm. 12 brass relics from a place that should have stayed buried. The kid handing them over smiled too fast, too rehearsed. North entrance. Maintenance. Security office. Don't use the others, the kid said, tapping them with a pen. North entrance. Maintenance. Security office. The rest clinked like chimes. Curfew's been posted. No one comes in after dark anymore. If you hear anything, it's probably pipes. Pipes, Darren repeated to himself as he watched the kid's taillights vanish into the fog. Echo Court Mall rose ahead of him, a dark colossus with a dead fountain for a heart. Its glass hulk reflected a version of the sky that looked more diseased. He knew the headlines from years ago the way your tongue knows a missing tooth. Mass shooting, the word said on a loop. 9 dead, 3 of them kids. Echo Court shuttered for mourning, then for renovations, then for good. The chain links girdling the entrances wore sagging tarps, as though the mall had been dressed for a wake that never ended. Darren let himself in through the north entrance. The smell of chlorine ghosted the air, though no pool had ever lived here. His footsteps made small surprise sounds on the tiles. There were signs, all the old tenants like a graveyard. Shoe time, glow nails, Sizzler's Grill. Some still had their letters. Some are only black hooks where letters had hung. He found the security office by memory, and by the way his body remembered rejoinders. Go where you can see all exits, put your back to a wall, don't sit too long. Inside, the monitors blinked at him like aquarium fish. Some cameras were dead, snowing static. Others showed angles of the food court, the empty carousel at the children's play area, the escalators wrapped in yellow caution tape that had gone the color of tea. The mall breathed around him, a slow and indifferent organ. Pipes, he told himself. First night, nothing. Second, nothing. There were sounds, a distant drip like a metronome, ductwork clanking as if something crawled inside. But they were the kind of sounds big buildings make when they have nothing better to do. He walked his routes, flashlight combing banks of storefront shutters, and sometimes he paused at the memorial down by the fountain. Laminated photos on a corkboard, edges curled. A paper wreath going ivory with time. A deflated balloon whose silver had gone brown. He read the names and didn't say them out loud. The third night, the applause came. It wasn't loud, more like a ripple. He was sitting in the cracked pleather chair, the monitors humming their low consensus, when a first quick patter drifted from somewhere in the center of the building. It made the hairs on his arms stand on end, because applause should be warmer, more human. This was colder, thin as moth wings. He checked the time, 3:07 a.m., and stood with the sort of automatic care you use when lifting something fragile. Flashlight, keys, radio. He heard it again, a smattering, then another, as though a performance had hiccuped into being and the audience wasn't sure the curtain had truly risen. Pipes, he said, an incantation as he opened the office door. By the time he reached the food court, the sound had stopped. Chairs lay on tables like peeled carcasses. A strip of fake palms cast sword-like shadows. The fountain's basin, emptied, held a summer's worth of leaves crisp to the color of old coins. Darren waited, listening. A far vent coughed. A rat made a noise like a bottle cap rolling. When he got back to the office, he rewound the footage, searching for a motion flag, anything. The cameras smudged through time like thumbed pages. And then there it was. The food court feed showed movement, a hazy congregation blooming out of the grainy dark. They filled the benches, flows and knots of people like ink and water. Their faces were wrong, not blurred so much as unfinished. When their hands came together, the sound arrived a beat later in the office, as if the applause had to cross some invisible distance between a recording of the past and a room in the present. He rewound again, frame by frame, trying to catch a face, trying to name the feeling gathering in his throat. On the third loop, he noticed the timestamp. 3:07 blinked to 3:08, then shuddered, then flicked back to 3:07. On the fourth, it delivered him 3:07 again, like a dealer reoffering the same losing card. He watched the footage until his eyes felt sanded. On the fifth loop, his radio crackled with his own voice saying, in a tone he hadn't used in years, Not since he last stood in a dark doorway with a gun drawn. Sit down. The show's about to start. His hand went cold where it held the radio. The words rolled in him like a tide. Memory, shame, an urge to obey. He'd said similar lines once when he was the kind of man people looked at to do something. Not to celebrate, but to stall, to comfort, to control a room full of witnesses whose mouths had fallen open like wounds. "Copy," he said to the radio, hating the tremor in his voice. Static hissed back, the breath of some large, sleeping thing that was not asleep. He went back to the food court with a stubbornness that felt like the last light in a long hallway. His flashlight found the ring of chairs closest to the fountain. He lowered one, set it square, and sat. The applause had ceased. The time was a version of 3:07 that had eroded into nonsense. He could feel time like grit in his teeth. "I'm here," he said to the air. His voice disappeared into the rafters. The carousel horses watched him with milk-glass eyes. One had a crack in its neck that opened like a second smile. He imagined people here, the selves they shed to shop, the harried mother, the teen in a hoodie, the man who had come to do something terrible because people didn't mean anything to him, because his own pain demanded a choir. He had known men like that too well. He had worn their outcomes like weight belts on his lungs. On the job, afterwards, after the bottle, after the last precinct door shut behind him. A sound, not clapping. The tiny scrape of a chair foot dragged an inch. He swung the flashlight. The beam caught chrome, then leather, then a sheen like sweat. There was no one there, but the chair he had set down had turned slightly, angling toward the fountain. He had not angled it that way. The lights on the mall directory flickered once, twice, and came alive. The screen was a map of their world. "You are here." Red dot. The red dot moved as he watched it, leaving his location empty and glowing instead at the center of the food court. A path traced itself from the north entrance. It pulsed a vein. He stood. He lifted another chair, then another, setting them down in a circle. It felt like something he'd learned long ago, something about rituals, debriefings, the way people sit to talk when a bad thing has happened, and the talking can make it either better or worse. By the fifth chair, his hands had steadied. By the ninth, he could feel a cold breath on his wrist whenever he turned it, as if someone invisible leaned close to watch him work. The monitors back in the office were still rolling. He knew this the way he knew a room's exits. He could feel the camera's attention like nettles on his skin. He pictured the feed showing him from above, bald spot winking, shoulders rounded, set to this foolish task. He pictured the crowd gathering with him, their unfinished faces lifting as if to sing. The applause returned not as a single wave, but as scattered fire, pockets of it breaking out and catching. He felt it come up through the chair and into his bones. He sat because the radio had told him to, or because his legs were tired. The speakers in the ceiling gave a small, painful pop, and the intercom came alive with a hum. A man's voice, or his voice, or a copy of his voice, spoke. "Ladies and gentlemen," it said pleasantly, "we thank you for your patience." Darren found his radio. "Who is this?" he said. "Who's in my?" "Please refrain from flash photography," the voice said. "Please remain seated." The fountain, which had been dry for a decade, coughed up a handful of water that glinted like nickels. He stared at the wet darkness of the stain as it widened. The names down there, he could hear them if he stopped trying not to. He had been trained to hear things that weren't words. Agitation in a caller's breathing, the speed of a fearful heart, the sound a man makes when he has already decided. "I wasn't here," Darren said to the stain, to the circle of chairs, to the cameras. "I wasn't on that call. They pulled me off nights the week before." He had said those sentences to everyone who tried to hand him their guilt. He had said it to the mirror, to the bar mirror too. He had said it until it turned from truth to defense, from defense to script. "Sit down," his own voice whispered from the radio, or from inside his jaw, where he kept it clenched. The show's about to start. The time did not progress. The mall was a closed body with a heartbeat that was not his. On the monitors, the crowd leaned in. He knew because he could feel the air pressure change, a soft push on his chest. "Okay," he said, and placed his palms on his knees like a student. "Okay, let it run." The lights dimmed, theater slow. Somewhere far off, a children's ride chimed 3 notes, the 4th swallowed. On the directory map, the red path pulsed, then steadied into a single bright line, like a scar. He could feel the night narrowing to a point. He could feel that this was the 5th loop, or the 50th, that ending and beginning where one word said different ways. He heard a step behind him. It could have been a shoe or a chair settling. He did not turn. The applause swelled, bright and terrible, faceless hands crashing together in adoration of whatever was about to repeat. He didn't know if he had sat in this circle before, if he had been one more shadow in the recorded crowd. He thought maybe that was what it meant to be haunted. Not that the dead came knocking, but that the living never got to leave. "Welcome back to Echo Court," said his voice, everywhere and nowhere, and he tried to answer, but his mouth filled with the taste of coins. Through the intercom came the smallest clearing of a throat. Tonight's feature, the voice said, is the same as always. He knew what would follow, the sound that would break the world into before and after. He knew, and still he stayed. His hands, obedient, cupped his knees, ready at the cue. The applause crashed down like rain. The fountain water shivered and stilled. The clock on the wall failed to move. Somewhere, on a series of screens, a man sat among shadows with no faces. Somewhere else, or in the same place, he lifted his radio to his mouth and spoke. "Sit down," Darren said, his voice cracking in the static, and he did as he was told. They hired Lisa for 2 nights, cash on Monday, no benefits, and a key ring that pinched her palm like a trap. Maplewood Mall, the manager said over the phone, was quiet as a grave and twice as safe. He apologized for the short notice. Their regular night guard had quit for personal reasons, and the alarm system contract required a warm body on site. "You'll just make rounds," he said, "sign the log, and call me if teenagers show up to film ghost videos." He laughed when he said it, like laughing could make it true. The mall loomed out of the suburbs like a capsized ship. In the early 2000s, it had been all skylights and tile, the kind of place where afternoons went to dissolve. Pretzel smell, carousel music, the inexhaustible glare of fluorescent lights. Then the big anchors left, then the food court went dark, and someone decided to mothball instead of demolish. The result was a memory in concrete. The result was Lisa, weekend security, clutching her thermos at the employee entrance while her breath wrote brief messages on the glass. First route, she told herself, opening the door with a shoulder shove. Talking kept her company. In her old job as an EMT, she'd talked to the dying and the dead, and it made the waiting shorter. The air inside had the stale sweetness of forgotten things. Her flashlight found dust fur on the floor and drifts of flyers advertising sales long finished. Maplewood had been famous for its manifold clothing stores. They lined the concourses with shuttered ribs. Behind several, someone had left their mannequins. Thousands, the manager had said cheerfully. Cheaper to abandon than to sell. They were everywhere, some set in lonely tableaus behind locked glass, some naked and stacked like firewood in service corridors. Their forms were the color of milk and glue. She saw headless bodies with elegant wrists. She saw heads without bodies, eyes half suggested by the mold. On her first pass, she patiented her light across their glossy faces and told herself that the shiver running up her arms was the air conditioning switching on. It wasn't. The HVAC had been killed years ago, but the mind liked stories with gears and switches. The first night was mostly walking. The cameras in Corridor B were dead, had been dead for years, so every time she crossed their field, she grinned into the empty black domes like a kid. "Boo," she whispered once, then felt foolish, then better. At 1:13 a.m., in the window of a bridal shop, she saw a mannequin wearing a veil of cobweb and a price tag that still declared some things are forever. At 2:40 a.m., her own reflection in an unlit storefront startled her so badly she apologized to it. At 3:07, passing the old department store they'd called East Anchor, she had the plainest sensation that someone to her left had turned to watch her. She stopped, swung her beam back. White faces stood in their frozen stances behind the glass. Mid-stride figures with arms reaching for handbags that no longer hum. A child form with its hand raised for a parent who was heir. None of them had moved. Of course not. Her light stuttered as she laughed at herself, a gentle scold. "Just me," she said into the quiet. Back in the security office, a room the size of a storage unit, she signed the log and poured coffee and stared at the wall of screens. Static shivered through 3 quadrants. The functioning cameras showed a long-lit hallway with a display of artificial ferns, the silent elevator doors that would never open, a section of the food court where once there had been a chain selling orange chicken. A binder sat on the desk under a drifting film of gray. Employee log, it read in bold black label tape. She cracked it, more to have a reason not to watch the monitors than out of curiosity. The first half was clock-in/clock-out squares. The second half was a catalog of notes, some stiff and official. Water leak on level 2. Some informal, cramped handwriting about nocturnal raccoons, and a bat that had gotten in and wouldn't leave. Halfway down a page, a note stood alone, written in block letters with too much pressure. "Don't look them in the eyes. They move when you blink." She read it again, then shut the binder with guilty speed. Someone had been a comedian or a coward. Either way, it was contagious. She went back to the door and opened it to the cold staircase, as if to prove the world still behaved. On the second night, Maplewood had learned her steps. The building greeted her with the soft talk of settling, pops and sighs from the ceilings, a skitter she classified as mice until she remembered there was nothing left alive for them to eat. She made herself whistle as she walked, then stopped when the sound bounced back from the empty stores like a stranger trying to harmonize. She found the footprints at 12:38 a.m. on her way to top off her coffee. They began right outside the security office door, as if someone had been standing there, waiting to be let in. They were human prints, bare, size 9 if she had to guess, and each one was clean as a stamp. Heel-arched toes. The dust had taken them perfectly. She crouched and put her own boot down next to one. The toes of the print tapered in, and the second and third toes were slightly offset, the way real toes are. No mold seam, no vacuum-formed smoothness. Not mannequin feet. The prints trailed away down the hall without smudge or skip, each step its own perfect absence of dust. Real good prank, Lisa said, because saying things pins them down. She took a photo anyway, like the good temp she was, and followed. They led with calm, steady spacing to the east anchor. The glass of the department store doors had been fogged by time and the breath of seasons. Someone had written Lisa in the haze with a finger and then tracked lines through it like a child drawing a sun. She blinked, heart supplexing her sternum, and aimed the flashlight dead center. The mannequins inside had been arranged to suggest motion. That's how you sold. Movement, urgency, a promise that even standing still you were going someplace. Arms extended, torsos angled, the white host caught in mid-run. Some had no heads. Some had faces with features so gentle they were practically an apology. For a second, she imagined the building had been running too, and they tried to keep up. She checked the lock. Solid. She swept the light from crown to calf. It's amazing how many ways plastic can resemble skin if you let it. A polished catch on a cheek becomes oil. A fracture line becomes a vein. She either blinked or her beam flickered. When the light steadied, a runner at the front of the crowd had his head cocked 5 degrees farther toward her than he had before. She did not breathe for 2 long counts, then made herself breathe. "Don't," she told herself, and didn't finish the sentence. She photographed through the glass, because that was what she could do, and walked away with her shoulders pushed down from her ears by force. Back in the office, she opened the binder like a talisman. The note still sat in the middle of the page. 3 black sentences, nothing like rules, and everything like a dare. She made herself laugh out loud. "Sure," she said. "They move." She said about proving the world did not have teeth. She watched the monitors, such as they were. She made another route. She came back and checked again. The footprints had accumulated a thin drift in the depressions, as if dust fell harder into the absence. Her name had bled into the fog glass until it looked like a wound closing. She told no one because there was no one to tell. The clock surfed slowly toward 3. At 3 a.m. precisely, because she could not help herself, she went back to East Anchor. She took her flashlight and the binder, because why not carry your superstition with you? And walked down the center of the concourse as if she were a customer with a purpose. The glass doors showed her what she expected, a pale crowd running toward her forever. She lifted the binder and used the semi-gloss of the cover as a mirror, because she didn't want to see them straight on, because the note had gotten inside her, because her stupid heart. In the reflection, she was smaller than she felt. Behind her, multiplied and warped by plastic, dozens of blank faces had turned, as one, as if to a signal, toward the black square of the camera bubble in the ceiling. Her own reflected face sat in the middle like a signature, and the mannequins framed it like petals. The binder slid from her hands and clapped itself shut on the tile. She didn't blink. She didn't dare. Her eyes burned. Tears pooled and ran, and the sting made the world into a bright tunnel. Somewhere far in the building, a kiosk sign flickered to life and died, and that small change of light made her reflex fire, and she blinked. When her eyes opened, the crowd had taken a step. Not much, just enough to alter their geometry, the way a flock banks, the way a sentence changes meaning with one more word. An arm that had been lifted for balance now reached for the glass. A head that had been cocked toward her now regarded the little camera bubble above the door intently, expectantly, like a stage actor waiting for a cue. Lisa backed up until the door handle met her spine. The footprints behind her deepened by a hair in her peripheral vision, the dust making a choice to settle. She could feel the blank attention of the white faces pass over her and fix on something else. She followed their gaze to the black dome of the long-dead camera, its surface reflecting the mannequin array in a dark fisheye world. In that miniature, in that convex night, she saw her own pale oval among them, surrounded, centered, included. Her radio hissed, though she hadn't touched it. Sharp breath, then the faintest click of a tongue wetting a lip. "Don't look them in the eyes," a man's voice said softly, as if reading from a distance, as if the sentence were an echo in a stairwell. "I'm not," she said, and kept not blinking until the human body insisted upon its right to water and darkness, and she blinked again. When she opened her eyes, the faces in the glass were closer, and all of them, even the headless torsos somehow, were turned toward the camera, toward the blank, toward the idea of watching. In the office later, she would try to write about it in the binder, but the pen would hang over the paper like a stalled second hand. The clock would slip past 3 o'clock and then fall back, and the screens would make no sense at all. For now, in the blued hush of the abandoned mall, Lisa stood between her reflection and the crowd, and learned that some places are not empty. They are full of attention waiting to be returned. Miguel had been cleaning malls for 15 years. The job was simple, the pace steady, and the silence after midnight was something like peace. Rivergate Mall was no different, except for the rules. He'd been briefed by a board supervisor who barely looked up from her tablet. You stick to levels 1 and 2. Don't go below that. Level 3's sealed off, flood damage, structural issues, all that. If a door says authorized personnel only, it doesn't mean you. Miguel Nadif. He wasn't curious by nature. Curiosity didn't pay rent. He swept floors, emptied trash, and clocked out before dawn. Still, the basement always bothered him. The mall was built over a sinkhole, everyone said. You could feel it in the way the air got thicker the lower you went, like walking into a throat. Sometimes when he worked near the stairwell, he could hear the echo of running water, or something that sounded like it, pulsing through the pipes under his feet. It happened on a Thursday night, the kind of quiet that makes every sound feel like a mistake. Miguel was buffing the tiles near the service elevators when one of the panels blinked on. The light above the button read B3. He frowned. There wasn't supposed to be a basement 3. He'd seen the blueprints taped inside the supply closet, just 2 sublevels, parking and storage. But the elevator's LED flickered insistently, inviting. Miguel hesitated, thumb hovering over the button. Maybe it was a glitch, or maybe the elevator was just miswired. But the thing about working alone is that silence becomes a dare. He pressed it. The doors opened with a sigh like something exhaling dust. He stepped inside, cart in tow, and watched the floor numbers blink. B1, B2, B3. The elevator shuddered. A low groan rose from the walls. When the doors opened again, he found himself staring into darkness. At first, he thought he was looking into a cavern. The ceiling stretched high, full of shadowed beams and dangling cables. His flashlight beam caught the outlines of storefronts, dozens of them, lining a wide-tiled promenade. A food court, but something was wrong. The storefronts looked familiar, but not right. McDonald's, spelled with an extra, Taco Palace, with a cartoon taco grinning too wide. Kentucky Fried Chicken, where the Colonel's eyes were missing. Plastic tables stood in neat rows, all bolted down, all covered in a thin film of grease. The smell hit him, rot fryer oil, something sweet and spoiled. He turned back toward the elevator, intending to leave, but his flashlight flickered, and somewhere in the distance, a speaker crackled. "Attention, valued customers," said a voice over the intercom, distorted and wet, like it was coming through a mouthful of food. "Welcome to Rivergate Mall's grand reopening night." Miguel froze. The fryer stations along the walls came to life, sputtering to heat. The smell of oil thickened. The soda machines gurgled. A signboard lit up above the fake burger joint. 2 for $1 combo deals forever. He told himself this had to be some kind of automated test, old machinery kicking on. He'd seen weird things in dead malls before. Alarms, lights, looping messages. But when he heard the footsteps behind the counters, he stopped breathing. Shapes began to move behind the food stalls. At first, they looked human. Cooks, cashiers, servers, all dressed in faded uniforms. But their movements were jerky, twitching, as though memory guided them instead of will. One figure leaned over a fryer, scooping invisible food with a melted spatula. Another slammed a register drawer open and shut, over and over. Miguel backed away, flashlight trembling. The light caught a face, or something like one. The skin looked half-baked, blistered like dough. The mouth was wide, edges torn, the lips working even though no words came out. Only chewing, always chewing. "Combo meals ready," whispered the voice over the speaker. "Always hot, always waiting. Eat, stay, forever." Miguel ran. He sprinted toward the elevator, his shoes slapping through puddles of grease. Behind him, something clattered, trays falling, metal scraping tile. He didn't look back. The elevator doors were still open. Relief surged through him like air after drowning. He threw himself inside and jabbed at the up button. Nothing happened. He pressed again, harder. The button clicked uselessly beneath his thumb. The panel above the door flickered once, twice, then changed. B2, new food court under construction. His reflection stared back at him in the polished steel, wide-eyed, shaking. Then, in the reflection, he saw something else. Behind him, moving closer. The figures were coming out from behind the counters now, stepping into the corridor. Some crawled, some dragged themselves, leaving snail-like trails of oil. The chewing was louder now, wet and endless. "Eat, stay, forever." He screamed and slammed his fist against the door. Open, but the doors didn't move. The elevator lights dimmed until they were a faint red glow, like the inside of a smoker's lung. "Customers are advised," said the voice from everywhere, "to remain seated until closing time." Miguel stumbled out of the elevator, desperate, try to find stairs, anything. The mall's layout made no sense. Corridors looped back on themselves, dead-ending in blank walls where maps once hung. Everywhere he turned, he saw more stores, Cineswirl, Pretzel Prince, Starbucks. The signs pulsed faintly, as if lit by heartbeats. The voices multiplied. "Eat, stay, forever." They weren't coming just from the speakers now. They came from the mouths of the figures, synchronized, perfect, as they shuffled closer, their jaws opening wider than should have been possible. He ran until his legs burned. Somewhere he found another escalator, one going down. It should have been impossible. He didn't question it. He thought maybe there'd be an exit, maybe a maintenance hatch. The escalator moved on its own, humming softly. The metal steps were slick under his shoes. Halfway down, he realized it wasn't moving down at all. It was moving in place, looping endlessly. Above him, the upper floor was gone, swallowed by shadow. Below, darkness rippled like liquid. And in that darkness, shapes were watching. Rows and rows of faces rising from the pit, blank, pale, open-mouthed. Miguel stumbled backward. His hand brushed a railing that pulsed with warmth, almost like skin. The voice came again, closer now, right in his ear. "Thank you for shopping Rivergate. We'll never let you go." Something cold and wet wrapped around his ankle. He looked down. A hand, or what had been one, gripped him from between the steps, fingernails replaced by yellowed teeth. He tore free, stumbling, falling onto the tile. The escalator kept moving, swallowing itself. He crawled toward the elevator, dragging his leg, gasping prayers he hadn't used since childhood. The doors were closed now. Above them, the display flickered one last time. Basement 2, grand reopening complete. And from the black court behind him, 1,000 mouths spoke as one, the chant swelling like an anthem through the dead mall. Eat, stay, forever. They found the elevator doors, pried, open a week later when a new maintenance team arrived. No sign of Miguel, only the faint smell of frying oil and a single, half-eaten meal tray sitting on the floor, still warm. The mall reopened that summer, just 2 levels bright and renovated. But sometimes the new security guard said they could hear the faint sound of clapping plates and the smell of something cooking far, far below.